Okay, so it is a joy to have Bryan Mowrey with us here today. Bryan, good to see you, brother. All the way from St. Louis. Most of you will know Bryan. Bryan is our apostolic father leader who is overseeing the Confluence family of churches, which is now spreading all across the States and into Mexico and Nepal. And I've just been super impressed with how Bryan has been engaging with the all of the tensions in the US at the moment with regards race and policing and all of this kind of stuff. And honestly, being a white British guy, relatively new to San Francisco, it felt a little out of my depths. And I'm so grateful that this church plant is not just in the hands of me, but it's in a team, and we're in a family, a global family that cares about what's happening here. So I've invited Bryan just to share a couple of questions, responses to a couple of questions, which is if he could, Bryan, thanks for coming. And if you could just share a little bit about what you guys have been doing in Jubilee, in St. Louis, to meaningfully engage the really important question of race in the US over the last few weeks and months. And sort of within that, why it's obviously so important. But secondarily, then, any kind of advice really, or I guess hopes that you would have for Sanctuary with regards how we might also meaningfully engage with the question.
Yeah, so it's interesting what you said there, Tom. I think that you said how we've engaged. I think that the main thing that I think about is that you do engage. And by that, I think that's an everyone thing. And if you study the emotional life of Jesus, the number one emotion he expressed by far and away was compassion and empathy. And when you see how he describes himself, so there's one passage where he describes his own heart. In Matthew 11:29, he says that my heart is gentle. I am gentle and lowly of heart. I'm gentle and humble. And that's how people experienced him. They experienced Jesus as one who quickly identified with the pain of others. He quickly entered into the pain of others. The fact that he even came, the fact that he even showed up to earth, and, he became our pain. He became our sin. He listened. You think about that. The God of the universe listened. I will sometimes listen if I think I have something to learn. In fact, often I'll say things like, "Oh, I heard that. No, okay, you can stop right. I've got it." How many here know that God doesn't need to learn anything? But he listened. But he didn't listen to learn. He listened to love. And there's just something about, as Jesus followers, that we have to be those that need to be quick to enter into the pain of other people. And so there is a wrong way to do it, I guess. But I think if we do that, I'm okay with making a mistake. In fact, I was really afraid of making a mistake. So 6 years ago, we had a shooting of a police officer shot what became an unarmed black man, Michael Brown, in my city in 2014. And I thought I understood some things. I went to a high school that was half white, half black. I thought I understood some things, but I didn't. And I became very nervous to engage it. And so I started asking other, black pastors to come and speak to my church and answer questions. And I was very much oh, I don't want to mess with this. But I had a dear black brother in the church pull me aside once. And he's like, "Those guys are not my shepherd. They're not my pastor. You're my pastor. And I don't want to hear from them. I want to hear from you. And you may not have competency, but I know you have conviction about this. And I just want to hear your heart." And it really freed me. And I hope that I hope that we can all free each other, regardless of race, gender, socioeconomic class. I mean, I hope that we can have that kind of, I mean, I love that man's heart, and I want that heart too, just to be like, hey, the main thing is that we're a family. The main thing is that we're a community. And the main thing is that we are quick to enter the pain of other people. So the main thing I would say, my hope for you guys, for us, my church, is that we would be those that would be characterized, like known for quickly entering into the pain of others. Doesn't mean that we agree with everything. But before we tie up all the loose ends and define it, the Pharisees in Mark 3, there's that time where the Pharisees tried to trap Jesus and wondered if he would heal the man with a withered hand. And they're having this intellectual conversation in the background about whether or not this is the right thing to do. And Jesus is angered because here's a man with a withered hand, and they're having a theological conversation. And so I just think that we have to lead with our hearts and our hands, relieve suffering. We're all image bearers. So anyway, just entering in, being quick to engage with your heart. Don't leave your brain behind, but don't let your brain lead the conversation. Let your heart and your actions lead. I think that would probably be the main thing I'd say that we've learned. And so I think the thing that we're trying to practically engage our church with is we have three things. One new man in Christ. So this is the church's inheritance. The church's inheritance is to present to the world the mystery of the gospel. The mystery of the gospel is it brings Jew and Gentile together. The mystery of the gospel is there's now, there's no longer two, but one. And it's through the church that this mystery gets put on display. It is the inheritance of the church to show the world, to demonstrate to the world what it looks like for people who normally would not get along, to get along, but not just get along, but actually be family. And so, that's a big deal. So we want to learn, we want to constantly learn, constantly pray, constantly do what we can to act. And I personally would say that I think the evangelistic relevance of the church depends on this, the future, the 5 to 10 year plus outlook of the church. I don't think churches who don't meaningfully engage on one new man will cease to be relevant evangelistically. So it's a big deal. And so I say individually lean into it, engage. And I think collectively, just doing what you can to express the multifaceted God that we serve in all of its shapes and forms. And it's more than race. I think probably beyond the conversation, there's probably more to do. I think social economics play a bigger role. I think ages, having different ages. See kids, I see people who are my age and more, maybe, I don't know. I don't want to say, I feel, I think just having different people, there we go. Can I get a witness? There we got a witness. All right. Thank you for that. Thank you for not leaving me hanging. It's getting hot here. Where's Leah? Leah, I'm with you. I'm hot too. It's getting hot in this room. Okay. There, I'll stop I'll stop there.
Bryan, I'm so pleased this is recorded, particularly as it seems a lot of the church are away on Labor Day and missing this brilliant 10-minute infusion of wisdom and your heart. It's just absolutely fantastic. Any questions or thoughts from anyone as they hear that? This is not going Facebook living or anything. This is a founding moment. My question would be a practical question of like, although we will do stuff in response to that heart, some of that may be the same as you, may be different based on where we are. My question is like, any thoughts about specific things you've done that could help us not reinvent the wheel? But before that, I guess, are there any questions from the Sanctuary family in response to what Bryan said? Any questions on this topic?
I've got a question. I don't know that it's a clear question, so sorry, Bryan, but hopefully you'll get the heart of it. But all of this stuff is so, especially in today's environment, wrapped up in politics and wrapped up in the election and wrapped up in all of that. And I guess, you know, how do you have any tips of like how we practically engage when the moment you start actually like, when feet get on the ground, it becomes political, and you live in it. We're in this environment where people are throwing bombs, and you want to be open to all, and you don't want to offend anyone. You don't want to like get into that partisan match. But the moment you start actually living this out practically, there are, you know, you can find yourself in some conversations that you didn't anticipate. Or do you know what I'm trying to say? Like, how do you navigate the political landscape?
100%. Well, yeah, I mean, it's a huge question. I'll try to be brief. Few things that I think about that come to mind. Number one, I think as a church, let's lament the fact that we've taken a back seat to this conversation. One new man in Christ is our inheritance. The calling for dignity and value of all people is on page 1 of our Bibles. We're all made in the image of God. Any assault, any assault on a human being is assault on the nature and character of God. Christians built hospitals. I mean, we have a great history. We invented human rights. This is like our thing, and we've just taken a backseat. So number one, I would lament that and say, and lament that we've given up on the conversation. Number two, I'd be quick to point out to myself and to anyone else that it's first a biblical thing before it was a political thing. And I think that's why the heart really matters. I think that's why the heart and action, leading with your heart. I think if as soon as you start having an intellectual conversation, as soon as you start going there first, that's how it becomes political. I think you just express it. I think if anyone says, well, the church has done da-da-da, you say, you know what, you're right. You're absolutely right. It has. And, they quickly point out how Jesus didn't. And there's lots of examples of how Jesus broke so many cultural barriers and norms. I mean, the woman at the well, I mean, the 700 years of oppression and racism between Samaritan and Jews. There's a woman at the bottom of this. So, I mean, this woman was rejected by her own people. She was at the bottom of the bottoms, and Jesus engaged her. So there's so much in the Bible that we can put on display. So I would I'd studied the Bible on these subjects, but I think I would just make it a biblical concept and not make it an intellectual one, and get out in front. And you have to say, here's what I'm not saying. And I wouldn't get into, like I said, I wouldn't get into there are a lot of traps. I mean, there's critical race theory. There's, what about Black Lives Matter, the movement? There's all these kinds of things that I just think man, that's like the Pharisees having a conversation about whether or not this man should be healed on the Sabbath when in front of you is a guy with a withered hand. Have some compassion and relieve the suffering, and let's have the theological conversation later. I think that, I think I would lament and be quick to admit the pain and the fact that church has taken a backseat. But then I would quickly try to bring in the Bible and talk about Jesus and what he was like, and just express heart. And then listen. I mean, obviously, if someone you disagree with, I would probably just ask them to tell me what they think, and I would just listen. And if they didn't ask me what I think, I probably wouldn't say anything. I would probably just listen. If they disagreed with me, like if that's what you're talking about, like what do you do when someone disagrees? I would just listen to them, and I wouldn't agree with them, but I wouldn't disagree with them. And if I did, I wouldn't say I disagree with them, and I wouldn't say anything unless they asked me. It's probably what I do. I mean, on an individual level.
That's super helpful, Bryan. Really helpful.
We have a deficit. I think there's a deficit of like not coming with the answer.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the more we just come to like listen and hear, I think that'll go a long way.
Brilliant.